Hello, everyone. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode that we have here today. Ladies and gentlemen, I have very bad news the, for Colombia's republic and its institutions. Uh, it's hard for me to even say this, but the communist terrorists from M19, Gustavo Petro, has won the Colombian presidential election. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is an extremely dark day for Colombia's republic and its institutions. The fact of the matter is that the far left in Colombia, since the peace deal of 2016, in which FARC and other terrorists were essentially given amnesty and allowed to integrate back into Colombian society, have used the opportunity to infect Colombia with Marxist-Leninism in an attempt to destroy its institutions in order to make it a puppet of the Venezuelan dictatorship and a puppet of the Nicaraguan and Cuban dictatorship. And sadly, today, Colombia is literally in a situation in which its very existence is threatened. So let's get into this stream so we can discuss uh, some of the issues going with Colombia today. And so, unfortunately, as I've said before, Gustavo Petro has been elected as the first leftist president, or reality, it should say Marxist-Leninist terrorist, convicted terrorist president. And this is not the first time that Gustavo Petro, the M19 former communist terrorist, yeah, I don't know if he ever really stopped being one. This is the first time he's sought power in Colombia. Back in 2017, he was really interested in, you know, his political aspiration to take over the Colombian government. He is so like versus right here in the Columbia Focus article, former M19 terrorist, ex-convict, and former mayor of Bogota, Gustavo Petro has retaken the lead in new presidential polls last month. Yada yada yada. Um, Gustavo Petro, who spent 18 months in prison following a 1985 conviction for the illegal possession of arms, was declared a member of the M19 terrorist group. M19 was responsible for extraordinary human rights violations in Colombia, including the siege of the country's Palace of Justice at Bolivar Plaza in Bogota. I'd like to add to you that almost 100 people died in that siege. He pursued politics following his release from prison and recently served mayor of Bogota, Colombia's largest city, capital and largest city. How can voters be so foolish? It just makes no sense. His term was marked by controversies and corruption. Oh, well, wonderful. So this is what we see right here, ladies and gentlemen. You vote on with these Marxist-Leninist terrorists and these socialists. Well, this is what you get: controversy, corruption, evil, and it just makes no sense. But that is the situation right now in Colombia, as you can see right here. Unfortunately, this is where we are at right now in this situation. So let's look at this stuff from the New York Times. So Gustavo Petro wins the Colombia election, yada yada yada. Um, for the first time, Colombia has a leftist president. You mean a Marxist-Leninist terrorist president. Gustavo Petro, a former rebel and longtime senator who has pledged to transform the country's economic system, has won Sunday's election, according to preliminary results, setting the third largest nation in Latin America on a radically new path. Yeah, a dangerous path. Mr. Petro, 62, who received more than 50% of the vote, with more than 90% counted Sunday evening. His opponent, Rodolfo Hernandez, a construction magnate who has energized the country with a scorched earth anti corruption platform, just over 47%. It's not like Rodolfo Hernandez was much better. He was pro abortion and other stuff like that, but certainly much better than a Marxist Leninist terrorist. Shortly after the vote, Mr. Hernandez conceded to Mr. Petro. Colombians today, the majority of citizens have chosen the other candidate. He told his supporters in Bucaramanga, as I said during the campaign, I accept the results of the election. It's a lot different from Petro, who essentially said he would not accept the results of the election and promised violence if he lost. Of course, this is the way leftists work. Just over 58% of Colombia's 39 million voters turned out to cast a ballot, according to official figures. Mr. Petro's victory reflects widespread discontent in Colombia, a country of 50 million, with poverty and inequality on the rise, and widespread dissatisfaction with a lack of opportunity, issues that sent hundreds of thousands of people to demonstrate in the streets, yes, last year. Of course, it was the leftist terrorists who agitated uh, those demonstrations and stuff like that. The last president was trying to institute some reforms, economic reforms, and of course, the leftists went and agitated people to do these violent protests, and they did. And of course, once again, this is what happens when you let FARC and other left-wing terrorist groups into the government. The entire country is begging for change, said Fernando Posada, a Colombian political scientist. That is absolutely clear. The win is all more significant because of the country's history. For decades, the government fought a brutal leftist insurgency known as the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC, with the stigma from the conflict making it difficult for a legitimate left to flourish. Yeah, obviously, because when you're killing and murdering people to gain power, as well as engaging in drug trafficking for your money and illegal gold mining, kidnapping people's family members and friends, yeah, I think people would be a little ticked off. But the FARC signed peace deal with the government in 2016, and I just want to add that deal was as bad as the Iran deal. It's absolutely pathetic, laying down their arms and opening up space for a broader political discourse. Mr. Petro has been part of a different rebel group called the M19, which demobilized in 1990, although members still committed actions after that, and became a political party that helped rewrite the country's constitution. And of course, this is how it works. They rewrite the constitution when they get into power, so that way they can maintain and gain power much easier. Look what happened in Nicaragua and Venezuela. Okay, once the socialists, the Marxist-Leninists were elected, guess what? They never left. And they didn't leave because people gave them a mandate year after year. They didn't leave because they literally arrested their opposition and they threw people in jail who didn't criticize them. And they just said, "Oh, no more elections." You know, both Mr. Petro and Mr. Hernandez beat Federico Gutierrez, a former big city mayor backed by the conservative elite, in a first round of voting on May 29th, sending them to a runoff. And this is absolutely pathetic of the voters to not support a strong conservative candidate. You know, but this is what happens when you have the vote split. You know, because Mr. Hernandez, essentially split the vote. Both men had billed themselves as anti-establishment candidates, saying that they were running against a political class that had controlled the country for generations. Among the factors most distinguished them was how they viewed the root of the country's problems. Um, you know, yeah, root of the problems, probably country's problems. Yeah, one of them was communist Marxist-Leninist terrorism. Mr. Petro believes the economic system is broken, overly reliant on oil export. For crying out loud, oil is Colombia's biggest export. Okay, that's how it. For crying out loud, you're going to cut that off, and a flourishing and illegal cocaine business that he said made the rich richer and the poor poor. Yeah, that's just how they seduce people. That's not, but again, this is what communists do. They make a land of the haves and the have-nots. Look at Venezuela. Okay, the Venezuelan leadership are gorging and dining themselves on food while the people starve. He is calling for a halt to all no oil exploration. That's so stupid. A shift to developing other industries and an expansion of social programs while imposing higher taxes on the rich. I would like to say that the shift to developing other industries, tourism is great in Colombia, but it is not the way for Colombia to fully make money. It's the oil. And of course, an expansion of social programs. What does that even mean? And while imposing higher taxes on the rich, well, that's what they say, but they end up imposing higher taxes on everybody. and of course, though, not the party elite. What we have today is a result of what I call the depletion of the model. Mr. Petro said in an interview referring to the country's economic system. The end result is brutal poverty. Yeah, the suffering of Colombia was caused by people like you, Mr. Petro. So shut up. His ambitious economic plan has raised concern. One former minister called his energy plan economic suicide. And that's what will happen, ladies and gentlemen, when you elect a Marxist Leninist. You will have not just economic suicide, you will have constitutional suicide. The end of your democratic Republican process as you know it. Mr. Petro will take office in August and will face pressing issues with global repercussions. Yeah, of course, and they're going to be exacerbated by people like him. He will face a highly polarized society. Well, blah 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 blah. Mr. Petro could reshape Colombia's relationship with the U.S. Yes, and for the worse. Colombia and the United States have had a strong, great relationship, and now it's going to be an ended if this person has his way. And instead of the United States and Colombia being a strong bulwark against communism, Marxist-Leninism, and fighting against narco traffickers, what's going to happen is instead that this man is going to welcome the Kremlin. He's going to welcome Vladimir Putin. He's going to welcome the Ayatollahs. He's going to bring them in from Iran, and he's probably going to welcome Assad Baathis into the country too as well, potentially even North Korea. And so this is a dangerous turn, um, Mister. So this is just absolutely disgusting, and it's sad because people are writing this guy off and thinking, "Oh, this is so great," No, it is not. Okay, let's see all these people cheering for this former terrorist right here. I just like to quote Star Wars right here. This is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause. All these people like here are reveling in their own suicide as a nation with what they are doing. And of course, it's absolutely ridiculous, the leftist apologetics of this terrorist and his organization. Um, you know, Again, so this part right here. Before he was a politician, Gustavo Petro was a part of an urban guerrilla group. Long before he was a leftist candidate for president, he was part of the M19, an urban guerrilla group that sought to seize power through violence in the name of promoting social justice. Gee, kind of sounds a lot like Antifa, you know. Oh, I'm here to help you, and then smash your business windows, burn it down, assault people in the streets. Yeah, that's not. Yeah, you call that social justice. For some voters, his past was a source of concern after decades of of armed conflict. Yeah, from terrorists. For others, it offered a sign of hope for one of the most inequitable countries in Latin America. BS. Okay, and so let's get a difference here. So M19 is not FARC. Okay, FARC is the bigger organization. M19 was a different one. M19 is more of an urban group compared to FARC, which was supposed to be like a national group. M19 emerged in the cities compared to FARC, which emerged in the jungle areas of Colombia. The M19 was a military group formed by university students and activists and artists who wanted to topple the government system they believed failed to bridge chronic divide between the rich and the poor. Yeah, okay. This is such terrorist apologetics. So the M19 was born in arms to build a democracy, Mr. Petro told the New York Times in an interview. And of course, yeah, oh yeah, sure. Arms to build a democracy, right? Killing 11 Supreme Court justices and dozens of other people, on other occasions. That's building a democracy. BS. It's building totalitarianism. It originally tried to promote a Robin Hood image and stuff like that. Yeah, that's how all terrorist groups sort of act. You know, and then of course, then you see the real thing. Okay, so Mr. Petro joined the group when he was 17 as an economics student. Oh, what apologetics here? Dismayed by the poverty he witnessed in the town where he was living. Yeah, BS. Okay, while the M19 was less brutal than other groups, oh my gosh, this kind of reminds me of Marxist-Leninists and the CNN stupid line. Oh my God, mostly peaceful, right? As the cities were burned down, sections of cities were burned down. Um, it did orchestrate what is considered one of the bloodiest acts in the country's recent history. Well, they got that right. The 1985 siege of Colombia's National Judicial Building that led to a battle with the police and the military, leaving 94 people dead. Um, yeah, and they were doing that, at the behest of Pablo Escobar. It's so ridiculous. These people, that the apologetics, for people thinking, oh, this is a great thing. Are you crazy? This guy's a freaking Marxist-Leninist terrorist. They don't care though about freedom in Colombia. So the group also stole 5,000 weapons from the Colombian military and used kidnapping as a tactic to try and wrest concessions from the government. Well, isn't that, typical of leftist terrorists, all the way from the IRA, okay, to FARC, geez, and the PKK. Let's not forget them too. Mr. Petro, who spent 10 years in the M19, largely stockpiled stolen weapons, said Sandra Borda, a political science professor at the University of Andes in Bogota. What is key is he wasn't part of the main circle who made the decisions at M19. Oh, well, he didn't really organize it. Come on. But he was still a part of giving them weapons and to commit their terrorist activities. It's like there's ridiculous idea. Oh, well, I was in charge. Yeah, but you still gave the guy a weapon to kill other people, so you're just as responsible. He was very young at the moment, she said. He didn't participate in the most important operations of the M19, the military operations. Yeah, still engaged in terrorist activities, and he was sentenced. He was convicted and sentenced to prison for his actions. So let's not forget that too. That he was put in prison for the terrible things that he did, and it's so ridiculous how some people are just playing terrorist apologetics here. Like they really think that this naive idea that these far left Marxist Leninist terrorists give a damn about the democratic process. They do not. They will win an election and then there will be no more elections after that. The goal of the Marxist Leninist terrorists in places like Colombia, their ultimate goal and their ultimate aim is to destroy uh, essentially all vestiges of the democratic process in those nations. Their goal is to destroy freedom and liberty and replace it with a Marxist Leninist totalitarian dictatorship. And we have to understand that the stakes in Colombia could not be higher. This is not simply an American foreign policy issue. This is an issue that is dear to my heart because my family has ancestry in Colombia. I still have family members down there, and I wonder what's going to happen to them. I've had family members, you know, going all the way back to my grandmother and grandfather, their relatives, who were taken by the FARC and murdered. This is you have to understand what is happening right now in Colombia is serious. This cannot just be ignored. And I see people on Twitter saying that this is the democratic process. Ladies and gentlemen, if you elect a communist or a Marxist Leninist to power and you elect enough of them to power as what is happening in Colombia, you will have no more democratic process. Republican democracy will die, just like it did in Nicaragua, just like it did in Venezuela, just like it did in Colombia. It may happen in Colombia. Sorry, that is what is at stake. You, if you let's read together um, an article from the Wall Street Journal. I think this is a great piece that I just read, and I think that you definitely should take a look. So, the stakes in Colombia's election by the editorial board. Gustavo Petro, a former terrorist with a hard left agenda, swears off against populist businessman Rodolfo Hernandez. You won't be able to see this article unless you subscribe, so that's why I'm showing it to you and reading off of it. So let's get into this right here. Much of Latin America has been sliding to the authoritarian left in the last 2 decades, absolutely. But Colombia has been an exception until recently. That status faces a stern test on Sunday when Colombians go to the polls to elect a new president. Stakes are high for the US, too, given the risk that the country could become another Venezuela, absolutely. And I've got family over there, too, and I fear for them. The choice in Colombia's election is between Gustavo Petro, an ideological ally, admirer, and close friend of Venezuela's Hugo Chavez, and Rodolfo Hernandez, a businessman and former mayor who vows to defeat corruption. Both are anti establishment populists, but only Mr. Petro went to the funeral of Chavez and declared the Venezuelan to have been a great Latin American leader. Oh, yeah, destroyed Venezuela, and turned it into the mess that it is today, and made it a puppet of the Ayatollahs in Iran, and of the Kremlin in Russia, and of the Castro regime in Cuba. In 2003, Colombia's Dinero magazine described him as one of the closest advisors of Chavez in the new model being implemented in Venezuela. Oh, well, that is bad. Mr. Petro began politics as a member of the M19 terrorist group. In 1985, he was captured and convicted by a military tribunal for illegal weapons possession. A month after his arrest, M19 snuck into the Palace of Justice and unleashed a bloody rampage. The military rescued hundreds of hostages, but some 100 people, including 11 Supreme Court magistrates, were murdered. So people don't understand that the only reason that Mr. Petro did not participate in this terrorist activity, this terrorist military operation, was because essentially he was in jail. And 11 Supreme Court magistrates were murdered. This was a terrible day in Colombian history in which M19 literally took the government under siege at the behest of Pablo Escobar. So let's not forget that M19 and which Petro was a part of, and still defends to this day, were friends and allies of the narco-trafficking terrorists Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel. M19 agreed to disarm in 1990, although they still had activities all the way up until 2000. I'll show you later. M19 agreed to disarm in 1990, and the rebels received amnesty. This is ridiculous. Mr. Petro has since explained away his M19 days as a passion for true democracy. Yet his record in legal politics hardly inspires confidence. Yeah, that's what they call it. It's just like with Star Wars in Episode 3. This is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause. Just like that great quote, that the best way for the devil to win is when he convinces people that he doesn't exist. He had been elected a congressman and senator, but he's also an advocate of bringing mobs to the street to achieve his goals. Geez, that sounds really familiar. When the left was saying, in 2020, to literally take to the streets, and burn down sections of cities and literally go to war. This is reminiscent of many strongmen in history. He has long called for a rewrite of the Colombian constitution, though he has backed off that language during this campaign, which is typical. They back it off a little bit because they want to try and fool center people who are undecided. And as as a mayor of Bogota, 2012, 2015, with a brief interregnum for mismanaging city sanitation, he showed an autocratic streak, which even his supporters worried about. Oh boy. The Petro agenda is a mix of left wing economics, woke ideology, good God, and climate activism. Shut up, tree hugger. He wants to raise taxes on the 4,000 richest Colombians, as well as seize pension assets saved in private accounts and force everyone into the state system. Kind of like, when they said, oh, you can have your health care and keep it. This is so ridiculous right here. seize everyone's private assets and force it into the state system, where the state will be able to control. If there's a public option and a private option, people have the right to choose whether they want to get in the public option or the private option. But what Petro is going to say, no, you all have to get into the government option. And what that is going to do, that's going to be a great way to control people's futures. You get their pensions, you'll be able to control them. Petroleum is Colombia's top exports, but Mr. Petro says he'll ban fracking and new oil exploration. That is absolutely suicidally stupid in terms of economics. He'd replace the oil industry with tourism. The tourism industry in Colombia does not have the same sort of weight the oil industry does in stimulating the economy. That is just economic suicide, what this guy's proposing. Mr. Hernandez is no free market paragon, favoring subsidies and protectionism for certain industries. Like Mr. Petro, Mr. Hernandez says he'd respect the agreement that Colombia made with the rebel group FARC in 2016. A deal, again, I would like to remind you, is akin to the Iran deal, a ridiculously, pathetically worded deal that even the Colombian electorate refused to accept. Okay, when it went to referendum, the people voted a majority to reject it. But still, then the government just did some rewarding and then didn't send it back to the people. They just passed it, because they didn't want to lose again. Because the deal was so soft for FARC and other groups that literally murderers and rapists and kidnappers would literally get off with slaps on the wrists. Both candidates say they want to negotiate with the National Liberation Army (ELN) guerrillas who still practice terrorism across the country. So there are still left-wing terrorists in Colombia active. They're just not they're just mask off compared to the you know uh, M19 and FARC people in the government. They're just mask on. But Mr. Hernandez has no history as an autocrat, and his criticism of Colombia's unpopular elites, of which Mr. Petro is a member, has struck a chord with Colombians. Mr. Hernandez is close to Mr. Petro in the polls despite his age at 77, and he's gained since the first round of voting as voters worry that Mr. Petro is a threat to Colombia's democratic institutions, notably the courts and the electoral authority. Damn right. Pattern of Latin America has been to Latin America left has to win one election, then rig institutions to remain in power. Mr. Petro still describes himself as a revolutionary, and he has said that if his progressive agenda doesn't win, the country should expect a return to sectarian violence. That sounds like a threat and a promise. Colombians have been warned. Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again, um, we were warned. We were warned about this, and yet we have not listened. We have not listened to the facts on hand. We have instead ignored the dangers of far left terrorism, of M19. We have ignored it to our own peril. And the Colombian people, at least more than 50% of them have been duped and fooled by this person. He's right here. He is an advocate of bringing mobs to the streets to achieve his goals. Gee, doesn't that sound a lot like other autocrats in history? He is a mix of left-wing economics, okay, so literally poverty like Venezuela, woke ideology, oh gosh, ew, and climate activism. Yeah, tree hugging. He literally has a policy of stopping fracking, and he wants to, like I said, this article earlier, stop not only fracking, but just no more sites and replace it with tourism. Colombia's economy will cripple if you do that. And of course, Mr. Petro again highlighting the fact that he was a member of this terrorist organization, M19, that he was convicted of possessing illegal weapons, that he was, as a member, organizing and finding weapons for the organization to commit its terrorist activities. And those weapons that he helped get M19 were a part of M19 siege upon the Palace of Justice, upon the Supreme Court magistrates, 11 of whom were murdered, and dozens of other people were killed, almost 100 in total. This is the ridiculousness, ladies and gentlemen, of voting for left-wing socialists and communists. The pattern of Latin America, the Latin American left, has been to win an election and then rig the institutions to remain in power, and that if they don't get their agenda passed, they will engage in violence. That is a threat and a promise, and Colombians need to wake up to that danger. I am so concerned for the history, for what is at stake in Colombia, particularly as I have family still there. Because if this is the future, ladies and gentlemen, the future of Colombia is seriously at risk. Oh, hi, Quick Sticks. Yep. He and I don't agree on much, but I try to stay friendly with him. And right here, Petro, our new president. Petro, yes, the new suicide pill for Colombia. We love Petro. Yes, Petro loves Colombia so much that he literally was participant to a terrorist organization and literally and supplied it with weapons, which resulted in one of the greatest most terrible terrorist activities in Colombia, the siege of the Colombian Supreme Court, in which almost 100 people died and 11 Supreme Court justices were murdered. And it was done at the behest of Pablo Escobar. So let's just not. So Colombiano TV, your foolishness is very telling and it's obvious, and I pity you. Let's go further. I want to read another article that is just very telling upon the issue in Colombia right now. That is extremely serious. It is extremely dangerous as well. And I'm talking not just for American foreign policy. I am talking about for the people of Colombia itself. I am deeply concerned with what's going to happen in that nation. Because again, this is just like Nicaragua. This is just like Venezuela. You vote the left in, the hard left in. I'm talking about like the radical communists and Marxist-Leninists in. And what will they do? They literally destroy your democratic institutions overnight. So let's read this article and let's go over some of its details. And I'm going to share the screen this time so that way you can read along with me if you choose. So, a Chavez admirer could take Colombia. Presidential candidate Gustavo Petro, a former M19 guerrilla, defends violence. Ukrainians are fighting for their homeland with everything they have because they know what they're in for if Vladimir Putin prevails. Colombians might want to take note. They're not at risk of losing their freedom at the point of a gun, but the peril they face if former left-wing M19 guerrilla Gustavo Petro wins the May 29th presidential election is no less daunting. Dictatorships in Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, and Bolivia all started with the popular support for change. Mobs cheered the consolidation of power that later led to the reign of terror. In Colombia, the Supreme Court is already controlled by Mr. Petro's friends, and drug money has infiltrated many institutions. The stage is set. Oh, gee, the Colombian Supreme Court is already controlled by Mr. Petro. Let's not forget, remember, M19 back in the 1980s murdered 11 Supreme Court justices, and now the Supreme Court is under their control. Gee, I wonder if there's any link there. Yeah, and drug money has infiltrated many institutions. Right, that is how M19 helped make its money, narco-trafficking, and we'll discuss that later. Colombia's 2016 surrender to the narco-trafficking guerrillas group FARC was negotiated in Havana under the guidance of the Obama administration. Well, thank you, former President Obama. Some of his foreign policy decisions are just outrightly ridiculously foolish. Then President Juan Manuel Santos called it a peace agreement. But since that deal, Drug trafficking cartels with political ambitions have soaked the country in blood. And I like how it says, I know it's not, it says Colombia's surrender. What essentially Colombia did was the deal legitimized former terrorists, left-wing Marxist-Leninist terrorists in FARC, and essentially said that they could get away with the majority of their crimes, even murder and rape, as long as they made a public declaration of what they specifically did as individuals and that they were sorry for it. The people of Colombia, obviously, overwhelmingly, almost 60%, I think, or 55 to 60%, voted against that deal in the referendum. But of course, the government then just simply made some minor edits to it and then passed it without a referendum because they were just trying to essentially get a PR win rather than think about the future of their nation. And of course, negotiate in Havana under the watchful eyes of the Cuban dictatorship. As part of the agreement, a special court is supposed to uncover the truth about 7 decades of rebel violence, mete out justice, and compensate victims. But instead, that court has been used as a tool to hunt enemies of the rebels while innocents are ignored. Colombia has also gotten poorer. All of this seemingly without a bottom. Well, if you think that you think, well, this can't get any worse. Oh, yes, it can. Yes, it can. And this is what these courts have turned into. These courts that were supposed to be about supposedly, meting out some form of justice and compensating the victims have now been used by the Marxist-Leninist terrorists to essentially hunt down their enemies. Well, who could have expected that? The nation is dispirited by its lack of leadership under center-right President Ivan Duque, a protege of former President Alvaro Uribe, Libertad Uribe. Yet, as any Venezuelan can tell you, things can always get worse. If Mr. Petro wins in May or in the June 19 runoff, that's likely. Of course, now we know that he has won, and this is obviously a dark day. And, I fault President Ivan Duque for not, following Alvaro Uribe's policy towards Marxist-Leninist terrorists like FARC. Ivan Duque, unfortunately has led to this. This is what happens, unfortunately, when you have conservative politicians who try to work out deals with the Marxist-Leninists and the communists, thinking, "Oh, I'm trying to be, open and like that," and instead, all you do is you let the devil in. It's like letting the wolf into the henhouse. A Petro victory is by no means a fait accompli. But as the presidential primaries on March 13th demonstrated, the opposition has work cut out for it if they hopes to bring liberty-loving Colombians together to defeat him. And unfortunately, well, we know that effort has failed. Mr. Petro, former mayor of Bogota, won the nomination of the left-wing Historic PAC coalition. He received the most votes, almost 4.5 million, cast for any candidate that day. Federico Gutierrez, a former mayor of Medellin, won the nomination for the center-right Team for Colombia Alliance. He received the second most votes, nearly 2.2 million. And I just want to point this out right here. The people of Medellin, remember, were under the control at one point of the Medellin cartel. That was Pablo Escobar. And you want to know why they reject a person like Petro from M19? Because M19 worked with Pablo Escobar. The siege of Colombia's Supreme Court was instigated by Pablo Escobar, the killings of so many people. And so, of course, the people of Medellin who have no love for Pablo, for the things that he did to them, they obviously rejected, Mr. Petro. It just makes no sense to me, though. Why the people in Colombia? And I've been to Colombia a few times in my life. It's gorgeous, but how could they forget the terrorism? It's just sad. Sergio Fajardo, a center-left former mayor of Medellin and a former governor of the Department of Antigua, won the nomination for the Center Coalition for Hope with about 723,000 votes. With around half a dozen candidates expected to be on the ballot and a simple majority of votes valid for the first round, a runoff is likely, but far from certain. Well, we know that there was a runoff. It got close, and Mr. Petro has essentially won the election. Mr. Petro's base is around 30%. The green woke crowd, ew, tree hugger. But in the 2018 presidential runoff, he got just 42% of the vote. High absentation sorry, abstention will favor him. So unfortunately, when people don't get out and vote, this is what happens. You think your vote doesn't matter, ladies and gentlemen. Your vote is clearly matters when it's a vote between freedom, liberty, and the Constitution against communism, Marxist-Leninism, and barbarism. A third of the country despises Mr. Petro for for his record on the side of domestic terrorists. In 1985, a group of his M19 comrades, we've discussed this before, snuck into the basement of the Palace of Justice in Bogota, machine gun security guards, and took control of the building. Even as they were making demands on President Belisario Betancourt, they began executing hostages, murderers. That's what they should be called. 11 of the Supreme Court magistrates were murdered. At least they call it murder. The Colombian military stormed the building, saving hundreds of lives. The incident remains one of the bloodiest assaults on Colombian democratic institutions in modern history. It's kind of funny, though, right? We have the New York Times earlier, who defined, as well, they were the less extreme group. At least the Wall Street Journal is more honest on just how vile this terrorist group was. Mostly peaceful. Remember that, mostly peaceful. Yeah, it's like, for crying out loud. It's so stupid. In an interview with Colombian journalist Vicky Davila last year for Semana magazine, Mr. Petro justified the 1985 attack. Well, of course, terrorists will do that. He called the elected government a dictatorial state, a state of siege in need of revolution. Don't make what was a rebellion look as if we're a group of thugs. Yes, you were. What you had in M19 were young politicians. Oh, gee, young politicians murdering political opposition. 11 Supreme Court magistrates executing hostages. Oh, wow. Mr. Petro said. He further alleged preposterously that the military killed the magistrates and called what came of the slaughter as peace and therefore worth it. See, this is how Marxist-Leninist terrorists work. Okay, what they will do is say, "Oh, blame the government," and of course, you have many people who are skeptical of the government among the left and even on the right, and so they buy into ridiculous, nonsensical conspiracy theories like this. And this is, of course, what you have right here. Oh, it wasn't us; it was the government. And then saying, "Oh, well, even if it was us, it was worth it because, social justice and peace." Yeah, as you blew these people's brains out, you murderous scumbags. Mr. Petro was a close friend of the late Venezuelan strongman Hugo Chavez. He told Ms. De Villa that he had been last seen in Venezuela in 2006. That was quickly corrected by Colombian columnist Daniel Reisbeck in the daily El Nuevo Siglo. Mr. Reisbeck noted that Mr. Petro attended the 2013 funeral of Chavez, whom he then praised as a great Latin American leader. Semana magazine posted a March 2016 Petro tweet in which the Colombian politician said he was in Caracas supermarket where he claimed shelves were well stocked. Okay, we all know that's a lie and it's ridiculous. We know what's going on. It's the fact of the matter is what is going on in Venezuela. Despite outlets like the Gray Zone, which is essentially tankies for the left news, trying to say, "Oh no, it's not really going on." The fact of the matter is that the so many Venezuelan refugees have gone out of Venezuela and gone into Colombia and even the United States, that the horror stories that they talk about, that it's literally undeniable. You cannot deny it anymore at this point. Mr. Petro wants to put state in the center of the Colombian economy. He would expropriate private pension savings, and that's a great way to control people. Take away their private ability, take control their private pensions. Well, you threaten, say, "Well, if you don't do what I want, well, your pension could be evaporated." That's a great way to control people. We already discussed earlier in this last article here how essentially the goal is to take all private pensions and put them into state control. Stop Colombian oil production, which was highlighted earlier, would essentially bankrupt Colombia, the country's number one export. Yet that would be the least of the country's woes. When asked by Miss Devilla if he would respect his 4-year term, he refused to provide a straightforward answer. Now, I'm sorry, but that is just ridiculous. When Alvaro Uribe won his second term and then was supposed to leave his second term, there was a measure to get the Supreme Court to allow him to have a third term. The Supreme Court said no. And did Mr. Alvaro Uribe seize power? No. He said that I will respect the decisions of the Supreme Court, and he left power willingly. You know, people who falsely smear Alvaro Uribe and Libertad Uribe as a despot and far right and all this ridiculous stuff. He left power graciously, and he did not seize power. When asked by Ms. Devilla if he would respect his 4-year term, Mr. Petro refused to provide a straightforward answer, meaning that Mr. Petro, ladies and gentlemen, is planning on what the communists did in Nicaragua and in Venezuela. They will get their fingers into the courts. They will shut down elections. They will essentially control the electoral process if there are even elections, and they will ensure that it is a one-party state where they have total control. Mr. Petro is a master of disassembling, and like Chavez in 1998, he touches a nerve with the common man when he denounces corporatism and corruption and promises peace. Well, haven't we heard all Marxist-Leninist terrorists say that before they start killing everybody? Too bad his solutions to all these two common problems are also chillingly Chavista. It's just so concerning what is going to happen in Colombia at this time. I am so concerned right now because the reality is that with Colombia's future is literally at stake, ladies and gentlemen. Colombia is at stake. Venezuela, Nicaragua are literally about to become are literally at risk of becoming, sorry. Colombia is at risk of becoming essentially what Nicaragua and Venezuela are. Nicaragua and Venezuela are far left dictatorships. Let's just make that fundamentally clear. Nicaragua is also welcoming, if you haven't been paying attention to the news, Vladimir Putin into the country. They're now going to be they have now said that they're going to welcome Russian troops into the country. How is that? That is essentially that is such danger, absolutely such danger. And in Venezuela, the Ayatollahs already have their hands in Iran. Hezbollah is in Iran. Sorry, is in Venezuela. They already have military advisors from Iran in Venezuela. How dangerous is that? And of course, we know that where Iran goes, the Kremlin goes. They're not essentially they're not uh they're not like these like antithetical enemies. No, the Kremlin and the Ayatollah government, the Ayatollahs in occupied Persia, and I don't call Iran. I don't like to call Persia Iran. I like to call it Persia, and because Persia needs to be liberated from the control of the Ayatollahs who have seized the government illegitimately there. What's going to happen in Colombia is if this man is allowed to promote those policies, we're going to see greater dangers in the Colombian state. And so we let's and so we this is such dangerous. Quick Sticks Productions. If you want to fight Marxism-Leninism, you have to offer social reforms and programs of a center-left framework. No, you don't. What you do have to do is offer people economic conditions in your country which allow them to have a decent standard of living, a good standard of living. You have to also offer them safety and security. People want to go out of their homes and not be risk of FARC bombs or narco traffickers kidnapping their relatives, things that President Alvaro Uribe brought. You also need to bring in economic investments, from bigger nations like the United States, which is what Alvaro Uribe brought. You also need to ensure that there is law and order with justice. And those are things that Alvaro Uribe brought. And unfortunately, the Colombians have forgotten because the FARC, being legitimized in 2016, has allowed for a massive push towards Marxist-Leninism in Colombia. And so the Marxist-Leninists in Colombia have not been twiddling their thumbs unfortunately, like the conservatives have in Colombia, which is disappointing. Is climate change not important? Not really the topic, but climate change. It depends on what your definition of whether it's really serious or not, whether it's man-made. It's or whether that's another topic for another time. I'll just say that uh, if there is evidence to suggest that emissions from vehicles and emissions in general do cause higher temperatures, and that's obviously an issue in Arizona where I live that needs to be addressed. Um, but I don't. But I'm not going to simply, lock, stock, and barrel say that, oh yes, that everything that the wacko environmentalists who say that we need to do about climate change is right. Because remember, a lot of these climate change groups are funded by the Kremlin covertly. Because I don't know whether or not they know it or not, because the Kremlin, and this is something from FDD, Foundation for Defense of Democracies, discovered in investigations that they were doing with a lot of these green earth places, is that the Kremlin was actually covertly funding them because it wanted to help with its oil production revenue. And so they were willing to spend a little money if they could get laws enacted in the West and the United States that would see some production, which meant they would get more. Radicalism doesn't come from nothing. It comes from a byproduct of deep social problems, something that the right doesn't address. That's just not true. Conservatism, and I've been going over this lecture, this topic in the Great Courses series, the Conservative Tradition, which is done by Professor Patrick N. Allett. I've been going over this right recently. Is that conservatism understands this? Is that changes in society should not be radical. The changes in society, if they need to be made, need to be gradual. The problem, you also need to take your time in reforms if you're going to make reforms, because sometimes if you go too fast, if you go too far, as what the far left does, then what you do then is then you destroy the very institutions that you were supposedly trying to protect and create. And not every reform is a good thing. I hear lots of people talking about criminal justice reform in America, but that does not mean that all the criminal justice reform is a good thing. That's why you saw in San Francisco recently the people in San Francisco, and they're not Republicans. The vast majority of people in San Francisco vote Democrat a lot, and they vote on the left. They would consider themselves liberals, and they voted out the progressive DA, district attorney, because the policies in which he was enacting were far too friendly and far too soft, and allowing crime to go up higher in the city, and not and to go into their neighborhoods, and making it unsafer for San Franciscans. So that's it's just not true. Uh, Alexander, the official change into Persian, Iran. Yeah. We'll do that another time. Let's see. The name of Iran is probably used by the Shah's exile. Okay, maybe it is. I just prefer to call it Persia. But we need to get back. But let's go. Now that we have addressed some of the comments, let's go to our next article. So, for those of you who don't know what M19 is, we've talked about that. That is a terrorist group, ladies and gentlemen, in Colombia. And I have this source right here, and we will go over it. So, just want to make sure. M19, Movimiento 19 de Abril, movement of 19th April. Although the M19, oh, let's get a little closer so that way you can see. Although the M19 is now a defunct group, its historical actions and importance merit inclusion in this narrative. The M19 was also a leftist group, but contrasting with FARC and ELN, was composed of urban intellectuals and the upper classes. So kind of like what we're seeing today in America with Antifa. Antifa is a move, and Antifa people. These people, our majority, live in urban areas. Like New York City, or Phoenix, or Los Angeles, or Portland. These are not, like rural sort of people. Um, the M19 traces its beginnings to and is named for what the group alleged were the fraudulent presidential elections of 19th of April 1970, where the former dictator Gustavo Rojas Pinilla was denied victory. The group is most well known for its characteristic bold exploits. In 1974, the group once stole one of the swords of Simon Bolivar as a symbol, pledging only to return it once Bolivar's ideals were accomplished. For those of you who know who not Simon Bolivar is, he is essentially considered the founder of Colombia, and he's essentially the founder of many different South American Spanish-speaking states. Bolivia is actually named after him, although he was born in Venezuela. In 1979, the group transformed itself into a serious threat by digging a 246-foot tunnel whereby it gained access to an army warehouse and stole several thousand weapons. Okay, and this is something that Petro was involved in, the acquiring of weapons for M19. Of course, I don't think at this time because he would have, no, actually, he might have, but he might have been too young then at this point in 1979, but certainly in the mid 80s. On the 27th of February 1980, the M19 engineered the takeover of the embassy of the Dominican Republic. The group captured 14 ambassadors, including the American ambassador and others, in exchange for a sum of money and transportation to Cuba. The final hostages were released on the 27th of April 1980. You know, Reagan, I wish he had really taken on these guys a little bit stronger. By the mid 1980s, the M19 would be the Colombia's second largest insurgent group behind FARC, but was short of funds. The group tapped into the drug trade by kidnapping the family members of prominent narco traffickers who, in retaliation, formed MAS. With the police and army help, MAS tracked down M19 members, then tortured and killed them, reducing the M19 membership by half. So this is again where the relationship came into place with narco traffickers. Although they started kidnapping narco traffickers, eventually they started actually working with them because they realized, like you said before, they needed money, and what better way to make money for a terrorist group than to essentially get in the business of the drug trade. This is why I'm not for the legalization of most of drugs. M19's most audacious action took place on November 6, 1985, when 35 insurgents stormed the Palace of Justice in Bogota. They took some 300 lawyers, judges, and Supreme Court justices hostage. The army attacked, and in addition to the kidnappers, 11 Supreme Court justices and 90 civilians lost their lives. That was M19's last major action. It's a horrific chapter in Colombian history. It's a part of the terror, essentially, of Pablo Escobar and his, M19 partners. By the end of the decade, the M19 had turned in its weapons and renounced armed struggle. The group, of course, though, they didn't really fully stop until the 2000s. The group returned Bolivar's sword and transformed itself into a political party. The party existed through the 1990s, achieving a significant percentage of the vote, but merged with another party in 2003. So, of course, what these terrorists do was they realize, well, they can't win the war physically, kind of like how the IRA realized that they couldn't actually drive the British out of, or the army of Great Britain out of Ulster, Northern Ireland. And so, of course, they give up on that campaign and then switch to politics. But that doesn't make them any less repugnant or evil. You know, just because its former terrorist puts on a suit and tie doesn't mean there's not the a smile of a murderer behind that, evil that you see. As can be seen, Colombia has had its share of insurgents groups. Those represented above are the major groups. M19 is one of them. And of course, I just really don't understand. This is the sad thing I see. Hopefully, the direction taken by the M19 and the AUC disarming will be adopted by the left wing groups. Only then will Colombia have a chance to end the insurgency that is now headed into the fifth decade. Well, of course, once terrorists never really put down their weapons, they simply put them on standby. If they don't get what they want through the electoral process, they will take it by force. This is just so sad, you know, for um, for the future of what Colombia is facing right now. You have a leader who is a member of this former terrorist group, and he's literally about to to essentially become, um, the president of the country, which is just a downright, absolutely horrible. And if you don't, and if you, again, to get a bit more perspective on M19 and their activities, I'll post the link right here to some of their, to from Sanford CIAS Center for International Security and Cooperation, which gives you a extremely thorough review of the leadership, the actions of the groups, with all sorts of different citations, so you can look it up and just see what the awful things that this group has done. Remember, they didn't really put down their weapons until 2001, and even then, they've still been involved, with subverting the Republican uh, the democratic process within Colombia. And it's not just the M19, ladies and gentlemen. That now that's going to is now literally in the government. We're going to see, ELN, the National Liberation Army, which is now Colombia's um, most active and still, and now biggest terrorist group in Colombia. They surpassed FARC, and what we're going to be seeing now is these people in welcomed into the government sooner than later. I can tell you that, and this will just be utterly awful. And if you don't believe that these people are not repugnant, they're still committing terrible activities, like drug trafficking throughout the United States, distribution of drugs. So, ladies and gentlemen, Colombia is at in a serious crisis at this moment. The future of Colombia, of the people of Colombia, and of the Colombian state, and of Colombia's is at risk. We have to repeat. We have to do something about this. The whole West needs to get involved with the conservatives in Colombia and say, get off your butts, stop playing around, and get out and get politically active. Because your failure to follow the policies of Alvaro Uribe and to maintain strength against FARC terrorists and against M19 terrorists and against ELN terrorists has led to this terrible crisis that Colombia is now faced with. It is just absolutely awful. Colombia right now is at a cross is not is it's not anymore at the crossroads because the election is over. Petro has been elected. And he will destroy Colombia. If the conservatives in Colombia don't stand up and do something, if they don't get out in the streets and get politically active and protest and say that we reject Marxism, we reject FARC, we reject ELN, we reject M19. If they don't get out and start winning elections again, and sooner than later, and if they don't protect the Constitution, because this is something that the Marxist-Leninists are going to subvert, as we talked about, then Colombia will face the same fate as Nicaragua and Venezuela. This would be disastrous. And I like what Alexander Hamilton says to say. All American politicians must treat Marxist-Leninism as a pure evil unto itself, no different than how they already treat Nazism and Salafi jihadism. All military acts against communism are justified. With Nicaragua welcoming the Kremlin into its borders, this is absolutely this is absolutely concerning. And so I agree with you, Alexander Hamilton, when you talk about the military action against communism. Because when we talk about what's happening right now in Venezuela too, how Venezuela has literally opened its doors to the Ayatollahs from Iran, who are the biggest instigator of terrorism throughout the Middle East. You know, it's not they are who literally support terrorism with the Houthis in Yemen, so terrorism in Lebanon through their proxy Hezbollah, through terrorism through their puppet Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and their terrorism in Iraq even now through their proxy the Dawa Party. This is such a huge concern, and this is why we have to Colombia has to get back to the policies of Alvaro Uribe. It has to remember where it came from. It has to go back to Alvaro Uribe's policies. We need to work in Colombia to get him acquitted of the charges that he is being charged with, evidence tampering and such, because this is nothing less than short of a witch trial. This is nothing but a witch trial to punish Alvaro Uribe, who went to war against the communists and against the Marxist-Leninist terrorists. You know, this is what happen. This is what happens if you don't continue. If the people after you don't continue those policies. Let's go over some of the stuff that he's done. President Alvaro Uribe, from 2002 to 2010, Uribe used U.S. aid under Plan Colombia to strengthen Colombia's state capacity. He utilized the military's newfound strength to push the revolutionary armed forces of Colombia, FARC, out of towns and cities and back into the jungle. By the end of Uribe's presidency, the number of FARC combatants had declined from 20,000 to 8,000, so nearly half, so more than half. And the National Liberation Army's ELN numbers had halved from 3,500 to 1,500, so 2,000. Because of this success, many Colombians saw Uribe as a national hero, with many claiming he was the best president Colombia had ever had. For many, Uribe brought stability and normality back to Colombia. The increased security boosted the economy, attracted foreign direct investment, and encouraging economic development. Upon leaving office, Uribe enjoyed an approval rating of 75% and would have easily won a third term if the Supreme Court allowed it. Of course, the Supreme Court did not allow it, and so he did not run again, and he allowed his heir, Duque, to continue this. But of course, Duque failed. And so why are conservatives the only valid opposition? Because the conservatives only have the proper solution. The Marxist-Leninists, the communists, the left-wing socialists, they don't have solutions. Their solution is poison. That's why the conservatives are the valid opposition in Colombia, because the conservatives stood up to FARC, they stood up to ELN, they stood up to M19, and without them, Colombia would not be nothing more than a failed state like what Mexico has essentially become. Mexico did not take the direction that Colombia took. Mexico is essentially now a narco state. And if what's going to happen in Colombia, if Petro is allowed to continue, he is going to do what the communists did in Nicaragua, and he's going to do what the communists did in Venezuela. And so we have to really, in the West, like Alexander Hamilton said, we have got to see Marxist-Leninism as communism as just a pure evil unto itself. And this is why we need to work on helping support, Alvaro Uribe, in Colombia. We need to really work on helping him and getting it, because if he is Colombia's now, in my opinion, only hope. The conservative movement in Colombia has failed without him, and he is essentially now, just like in Star Wars, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. It's now Alvaro Uribe. Help me, Alvaro Uribe, you're my only hope. That's the reality that Colombia has right now. Alvaro Uribe, stood up to people like Hugo Chavez. He stood up and fought against these communist tyrants and their supporters. Let's not forget that the Venezuelan government under this man right here helped aid and abet left-wing communist terrorists in the country and tried to spread their revolution into Colombia, and they've done that successfully. With their man right here, Petro. Okay, Gustavo Petro. Let's not forget, everyone. All right, was a big partner when was a big friend of when he was alive. Uh, was a big partner and friend of this man right here, Hugo Chavez. I think that the reality is that Colombia used to be so hopeful for the future, and it's not anymore. This is Alvaro Uribe's interview with the FUCA School of Business right before he left the presidency in 2012, when hopes were so high for Colombia. I just want you to hear the words of this, great man.
In Latin America, we have many challenges. The main challenge is how are we going to respond to our youth expectations? Therefore, in my opinion, we need education, lifetime education, and at the same time to provide them with what I call the tools of the market economy for them to undertake the installation of enterprises. Therefore, with some of my friends, we are creating a new non-profit university, and this university will begin in April next year. At the beginning, we are going to teach technologies and engineerings. And step by step, we want to cover all the country and to become in the coming years a very big online university. They, here at the university, students, they have the best opportunity for them to improve their preparation and, of course, to be ready to help their countries, for their countries, especially thinking in Latin America, for their countries to overcome many, many challenges that we have to face. Therefore, I am very hopeful to see uh, many young people here working with this determination, with this interest, with this engagement. We pass from one vicious circle to one virtue circle. Colombia was with much more violence, much more poverty, much more unemployment, much less investment, much more violence. We didn't solve all the Colombian problems, but the country was left on the right track at the moment we finished our second term. And what do I mean are the virtue circle? Security, democratic values, investment, high rate of investment, at the same time to advancing social cohesion, and of course, more security. Because Colombia has excellent people, a solid democratic institution. Colombia has been a rule of law. Colombia never defaulted. Colombia never suffered hyperinflation. And when we began to move forward with our policies, democratic security, investment confidence, and social cohesion, people reacted in the most positive and unexpected way. Therefore, people began to increase investment, to expand enterprises, to create jobs, and at the same time, the government began to collect bigger amounts of revenues and to invest more in education, in health, etc. In short, homicides came down to 40%. Kidnapping came down to 14%. Investment, foreign direct investment, apart from in between 1 or 2 billion to 19 billion. It is what Colombia got last year. And total investment. In the year 2002, the total investment in Colombia was, when you consolidate foreign plus domestic, the total investment was 22 billion. Last year, 80 billion. And 13 million Colombians left out of poverty during our administration.
So I just want to highlight, the words of that great man right there. He was so, powerful and such a good person. And he was understanding very clearly that the Colombia can be a great nation, that it is a great nation when it follows the right policies, when it follows capitalism, when it follows the rule of law and the Constitution, when it rejects, drug traffickers, when it rejects communism and Marxist-Leninism, and it fights for a better future. The reforms that Alvaro Uribe did and he made saved Colombia, and now that's all being put at risk right now. It's all being put at risk by this former M19 Marxist-Leninist terrorist, who has already said before that at the end of his that has said that at the end of his when asked would he leave at the end of his 4-year term if he were not to win re-election, he did not say yes, I would. He was very evasive. And the trend, remember again, among Marxist-Leninist terrorist groups, Marxist-Leninist communists in South America and in Latin America, is when they win the election, then to take over to take over the Supreme Court and other judicial areas and the electoral process, so that way either they control the elections from there on out, so they will never lose, or they just refuse to have elections outright, like in Venezuela. So as we begin to, I want to also address some of the I didn't say communism from quick sticks. Yes, you didn't say communism, but that's what it ultimately leads to. I'm talking about center left and center left politics. We are not in favor of Marxist-Leninism. The reality is that this is not what the center left in Colombia has done. The center left backed at least as far as I'm aware, backed an M19 Marxist-Leninist terrorist. And so what has done is the left has embraced this, and has this is happening uh, in many other places, and this is going to lead to the destruction of many great nations. Nicaragua is under the control of a communist dictatorship that is now welcoming the Kremlin in. Venezuela is under the control of a communist dictatorship where literally people can't even get bread or basic necessities and goods, and a huge refugee crisis was created in Venezuela. And you see this all over. So see. So center leftists are generally neighbors of ML, Marxist-Leninism, even if they officially oppose it, just like MLs, Marxist-Leninists in America are enablers of woke left liberals, even though MLs officially oppose Baizu wokeism. So Marxist-Leninists and the woke left are pretty much kind of one and the same. The progressives and the Marxist-Leninists really are essentially the same thing. They both have the same ideas. They both have the same values. It's just the look is just different. There's different people that are center that are left, but not like communist or or like that. Like there are obviously some Democrats in America's political spectrum that aren't that way, but that is not to say all of them. The problem with progressivism is that now it has actually is gotten a lot stronger in American politics, and this is absolutely dangerous. Because again, the progressive politics are essentially enabling crime. They are, essentially they are sympathetic to the Ayatollahs in Iran. They are sympathetic to Islamist jihadists, and they're apathetic to the Kremlin and other terrorist groups and other bad guys out there like Kim Jong Un. We aren't the U.S. patio. No, Colombia is its own free, legitimate country. But guess what? You know what your friend Petro is going to do? Sky Aerial Films. He's going to make Colombia nothing more than the patio of the Venezuelan dictatorship. And of course, Venezuela is nothing but a Kremlin Ayatollah proxy. Colombia for Colombians, yes. Colombia for Colombians, Sky Aerial Films, not Colombia though, not for the Castro dictatorship or the heirs of Hugo Chavez's dictatorship or for the Kremlin or for the Ayatollahs. Geez. Center leftist policies like universal healthcare have historically been effective at mitigating communism, but center left rhetoric and tactics absolutely have not been. So this is something that I should go back to with when it comes to conservatism. So, um, you know, Robert Peel and the conservative revival in the UK, talked about this. You can do reforms, you can do things like like repealing the Corn Laws, but you cannot go. You have to make any reforms gradual, and they have to be good. If those reforms in the long term are not good, then they're not really reforms, and you shouldn't implement them. If you do reforms, it has to be gradual. It has to take over time. You should not throw the baby out of the bathwater. Stay on your GD side of the Rio Grande. uh, Communists, shut the heck up. Okay, tell your terrorist loving terrorist president, Marxist-Leninist scumbag Petro, to go back to Venezuela where he belongs. Okay, go back to Venezuela, where he belongs, and send him back to his Kremlin masters and his Ayatollah masters, in Iran and in Russia. Thank you very much. It is. We have to. It's time to libertad Uribe. America and the West have to get behind, you know, the conservatives in Colombia, and the conservatives in Colombia need to wake the heck up. This is their wake up call. They need to stop being stupid like
Guess
this guy.
what? Everybody pisses, everybody shits. Get over it.
They have to get off their hands and actually start fighting for their country. They have to stop with this nonsense. They have to stop thinking that the fact of the matter is that the right has felt paralyzed in Colombia because it far too much acquiesced to the demands of the left. And as a result, that's where we're seeing here in Colombia. You know, Colombia has elected a Marxist-Leninist terrorist as its president.
You what?
It's just awful. And this is what happens in the trend in Latin American countries. You elect these far left uh, demagogues into the presidency or into the Congress or whatever, like in Nicaragua and like as Venezuela, you will see the destruction of your nation.
Just stop doing that.
This is what's going to happen if we don't stand up. And if our fellow brothers in Colombia don't stand up, and our sisters in Colombia don't stand up, this is going to be dangerous. This is awful. We have to stand up as neoconservatives, and and support the conservative movement in Colombia, because right now literally the future of Colombia is literally at risk. The future of Colombia is literally at risk right now, ladies and gentlemen. It's time to libertar Uribe. It's time to stop this embracing of Marxist-Leninism in Colombia. It's time to save Colombia. We have to. Right now, what's going on in Colombia is extremely dangerous. And if the West doesn't do something before it's too late, the Colombian people will be greatly in danger. This is about the soul of Colombia. It's the soul of the future of that nation. And I am so just concerned. If men and women in Colombia who are of sound moral character don't stand up for their country, Colombia will go the way of Venezuela and Nicaragua, and we can't allow that to happen. We have to start embracing neoconservatism. We have to stop, apologizing for neoconservatism and say that we stand up for its beliefs, we agree to its creeds, because we believe that we have to smash Stalinists, Marxist-Leninists, when they come out of their holes trying to destroy and subvert the institutions that we so love. We have to stand up for our nations and for our friends and for our allies. It has to start here, and it has to start now. Anyway, I think we'll close this video. I do want to appreciate everyone here who has listened in, has taken the time to hear the content, and everyone who's commented, even those against me. It's been fun. I hope you'll support me through all my different outlets. Again, please go to my link tree. You can support me on Ko-Fi. You can support me on Cash App, and you can even support me, like on Twitch. Like Give Me Bits or D Live. And give me lemons. You know, and support my work that way. You can also, just get active where you are. Start pushing for neoconservative policies. Wherever you are. You know, and really just start um, standing up for fighting against this evil. Because the fact of the matter is that Colombia is at a dangerous crossroads right now, and if we don't um, stand up and do something about it, against this Marxist-Leninist terrorist named Petro, then the future of Colombia is literally at stake here. This is it, ladies and gentlemen, and this has to stop. We have to stand up for the people of Colombia against against these Marxist-Leninist terrorists. And make no mistake, these people have violent intentions. Make no mistake about that. These people's intentions are violent. You don't believe me? I would like to share my screen real quick. Just to go to Twitter real quick. Commented on someone, who was talking about this. Gustavo Petro they were announcing this, and the person said, "Eat dirt, fascist," and then I said, "STFU, terrorist lover," and then this person right here, professional norms respecter at Balco of Walk, stated, "If only Hinckley used a caliber that wasn't a 22." So as you can see, people like this are actively okay with violence against you. See, these communists, like middle-aged Yoda or at Yoda aged, are intent on destroying and subverting, the democratic, the Republican institutions that we have, and this has got to stop. No thanks. Let's stand up for progressivism and social democracy. Yeah, to the detriment of your nation. Look what that did with Petro. Petro talked about, oh, I'm all for social justice and I'm all for this. Oh yeah. So I do want to thank you all for tuning in. I'll close with a prayer. Heavenly Father, we just lift up Colombia up to you. Heavenly Father, dear Lord, we pray that Colombia would see the light, that you would aid and help Alvaro Uribe in his criminal case and drop these charges or help him fight these charges against this sham of a show that's happening. We pray that the conservative movement in Colombia would wake up, stand up, and fight back against Marxist-Leninism. We pray that truth would prevail. In Jesus' name, I pray, amen. Again, thank you so much. Neocon action and V for victory.